Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I work in property management and have seen my share of difficult tenants, but nothing prepared me for what happened when I visited my friend last month. He owns a small trailer park where he lives on site and runs the office out of his house. I went to stay with him for a few days to help with some maintenance work around the property. A young couple had just moved into one of the lots with their mobile home. They seemed normal enough at first. The guy was friendly when we met him, and they just had their first baby together. Everything seemed fine until 3 in the morning on my first night there. That's when the guy showed up at my friend's front door, pounding and yelling to wake us up. My friend stumbled out of bed and led him into the office area of his house. The guy was completely frantic, talking about DNA tests and finding out the baby wasn't his. While his girlfriend was still recovering in the hospital after giving birth, he decided to get revenge by hooking up with some other woman. Earlier that day, his girlfriend had been discharged from the hospital. Instead of picking her up like any decent person would do, he refused to go get her. So this woman who just had a baby walked 20 miles from the hospital to the trailer park. When she got there, she found him with his mistress inside their mobile home. She completely lost it, started trashing their place while he and the other woman ran out and drove off. When he came back later, she'd locked him out of their own home. That's why he was at my friend's door at 3 in the morning, wanting to call the police. My friend woke me up and filled me in on the whole mess. I went out to the living room to keep the guy company while we waited for the cops. I tried to give him some advice about the legal situation. I explained to him about the 60-day rule for getting off a birth certificate if the kid isn't his, and told him that the police probably wouldn't be able to remove her from the mobile home since she'd established residency there. The cops showed up and knocked on the mobile home door. She answered. They did a quick welfare check on the baby, and that was it. They let him back into his own place. Not even 30 minutes after the police left, he was back at the office. This time he told us that she'd stolen his car and even tried to run him over before speeding off. Before the cops could get back to the park, she returned and started doing donuts in my friend's front yard. She destroyed his garden and tore up the grass everywhere. She stopped about a minute before the police arrived. The cops arrested her on the spot, but only for misdemeanor, malicious mischief, because of the damage to my friend's property. That was it. A day later, she got out on bond and came right back. She got into another screaming match with her boyfriend, and during the fight, she started scratching at her own throat until she left visible marks. Then she called the cops and said he'd attacked her. The police came and arrested him for domestic violence, and they took the baby into protective custody. After the cops left, she was bragging about how she'd fooled them. She even called his parents to brag about getting their son locked up. She was proud of it. Now my friend was really stressed. He had this unstable woman on his property with no income, and she'd just gotten their only source of income arrested and fired from his job. There was no way they'd be able to pay rent, but legally, he couldn't evict them until they were actually behind on payments. The next day, while her boyfriend was still in jail, she started throwing all their belongings out into the yard. Some of it ended up on my friend's property. He told her she needed to clean it up by 6 in the evening or he'd write her a violation. She ignored him completely. Later that afternoon, my friend and I were moving some bricks in his backyard, which was right next to their lot. The whole time we were working, she was outside yelling random things to herself. She kept screaming about minimum wage and getting fired, repeating numbers like $10.75 an hour and $35,000 a year. Then she'd switch to yelling about wanting to enjoy her life in peace but saying they wouldn't let her, and threatening to kill them. We decided it was better not to acknowledge her at all. We stopped working and went inside for lunch. That's when we saw the smoke. This woman had piled up a bunch of her belongings and set them on fire, not even on her own lot, but on my friend's property. My friend immediately called the cops. They showed up fast with a fire department right behind them. They found her standing there with a lighter in one hand and a gas can in the other. She had the water hose running, trying to put out the fire, but the cops stopped her from touching anything. My friend turned off the water to her mobile home like the officers asked him to. She started screaming at him for doing it, even though the police had told him to do it. The fire department put out the fire and the cops handcuffed her. I was sure they'd finally charge her with arson, but the fire marshal refused to come investigate. Without that, they couldn't classify it as arson. They just wrote her a citation and released her. My friend asked the cops if he could press charges for trespassing since she'd started the fire on his property. They told him they couldn't because they'd need to prove intent. She'd have to know she was trespassing for them to arrest her for it. Since there wasn't a clear property marker, they couldn't charge her. So my friend asked the officer to explain to her exactly where his property line was, so that if she trespassed again, they could arrest her. The cop agreed and clearly explained where her lot ended and where my friend's property began. When the officers were leaving, she looked right at us and threatened to bash our heads in with her baseball bat. Then she said she was going to blow our heads off and called us jerks. The cops had their windows down and heard everything, but they just drove away, without doing anything about the threats. About an hour later, we saw her standing in the middle of the street, stopping every car that passed by. Finally, someone pulled into the park and parked on my friend's property to let her use their phone to call the police. She wanted them to arrest my friend for turning off her water, even though he'd done it on police orders. Since she was standing on my friend's property to make the call, he pulled out his phone and recorded her. Then he called the cops himself. When the police arrived, they put her in handcuffs immediately. The same officer from before looked at the video my friend had recorded and explained that he wouldn't be arresting her for trespassing. Instead, he was doing an emergency detention order. She'd be taken to the hospital for a brief psychiatric evaluation and then released the same day. My friend didn't push for trespassing charges because he had a better plan. After the cops left, he called her ex-boyfriend's parents. The police had given them the only key to the mobile home when they arrested their son. The parents came out and locked up the trailer. My friend also noticed a water leak at the valve connection. He temporarily shut off water to the whole park, cut off the damaged section of pipe, and capped it to stop the leak. Remember how he'd warned her to clean up her yard or get a violation? Well, she never cleaned it up. Instead, she'd thrown almost everything from inside the mobile home into the yard. According to the rental agreement, my friend had the right to clean the yard himself and charge the tenant for it. So he loaded up everything, the TV, mattress, microwave, all of it, and hauled it to the dump. Then he wrote her both a violation and a bill for the cleanup service. A few hours later, she got out of the hospital and called her ex-boyfriend's parents for a ride. They hung up on her and immediately called us to let us know she was out. We were planning to grill dinner anyway, so my friend invited the parents over to eat and watch what would happen next. She showed up after dark, long after we'd finished eating. We were all sitting on my friend's patio, which had a perfect view of the mobile home lot. When she saw us sitting there, she let us have it. She called us every name she could think of, screaming about how we were all jerks and idiots and losers. We just sat there taking it because we all knew what was about to happen. After she realized we were laughing, she gave us one final insult and told us to screw ourselves. Then she stormed off toward the mobile home. When she got closer in the dark, she could see that her yard was completely empty. When she reached the door, she saw the violation notice. When she tried the door handle, it wouldn't turn. After a few moments of silence while it all sank in, she screamed into the night and called us jerks again. She must have been thirsty after her long walk because she went to the water hose. Nothing came out. Then she went to turn on the water at the valve, but there was no valve anymore, just a capped pipe. My friend called out to her from the patio and apologized, explaining that there had been a water leak at the valve. Since it was park property, he'd had to cap it off. He told her he'd have it repaired within the next 2 weeks though. 2 weeks was exactly how long he needed to wait before he could start the eviction process. By the time she figured out what had happened, she was stuck there with no water, no electricity since she couldn't get inside to pay the bill, no belongings, and no way to fight the eviction that was coming. She ended up having to walk back to town that same night. The ex-boyfriend's parents got custody of the baby when he was released from jail a few days later. My friend got his property back, got paid for the cleanup and damages, and never saw her again. I work as a land surveyor and have been doing it for about 6 years now. Most people don't realize how much detective work goes into figuring out where property lines actually are. You're dealing with old documents, faded landmarks, and neighbors who swear their grandfather told them the fence was in the right spot 50 years ago. The company I work for handles all kinds of surveying jobs, but the bread and butter is property line disputes. You know the type? Two neighbors screaming at each other because one thinks the other's fence is 2 feet onto their land. We come in with our equipment, do the measurements, check the old records, and usually settle things pretty quickly. Our process was simple, and it worked. We'd do our homework first, research the property records, look for existing landmarks, all that prep work. Then we'd schedule one appointment where everyone involved would meet us at the property. We'd take our measurements, show everyone where the actual boundaries were, and if everyone agreed, we'd mark it out officially. One trip, problem solved, everyone goes home happy. About 95% of the time, that was it. The other 5% was split between us making a mistake that needed fixing, or one of the neighbors deciding they didn't like what we found and wanting to take it to court. But even then, our job was done. We provided the survey, and if they wanted to fight about it legally, that was between them and their lawyers. Occasionally, maybe once or twice a month, we'd run into a property where the boundaries were really tricky to figure out. Maybe the old landmarks were gone, or the records were contradictory, or the land had been subdivided so many times it was a mess. In those cases, we'd need 2 trips. First one to measure everything and hunt for clues, second one to come back and show everyone what we determined. It made sense. Some jobs are just more complicated. But here's where things went sideways. My boss decided he wanted to make more money. One morning, he called us into his office and explained that he thought we were leaving money on the table with our single visit surveys. When I asked what he meant, he said we were being too efficient and that clients liked quick service. He had this idea that if we did 2 visits for every job, we could charge more money. Double the site visits meant bigger bills, according to him. My colleague tried to explain that this didn't make sense. The easy jobs didn't need 2 visits, and we'd just be wasting everyone's time. But the boss insisted that time was money, and more time meant more money. He told us that starting the next week, every survey would get 2 appointments minimum. We tried our best to explain why this was a terrible idea. Our system worked because it was efficient. Clients came to us because we were fast and accurate. Making simple jobs take twice as long would just create delays and angry customers. But the boss brushed off our concerns, telling us we were thinking too small and that he knew business better than we did. So we started doing exactly what he wanted. Every single job, even the ones where we could have had everything sorted in one visit, got stretched into 2 appointments. First visit to measure and analyze, second visit to present our findings. It was completely ridiculous. We'd show up to a straightforward property line dispute, spend an hour taking measurements we could have explained on the spot, then tell everyone we'd be back next week to show them where the line was. The problems started almost immediately. Our appointment book filled up fast because every job was taking twice as many time slots. New clients were having to wait longer to get their first appointment scheduled. And since we had to go back to every property for a second visit, we were constantly behind schedule. When potential clients called asking when we could come out to survey their property, I had to tell them we could schedule their first visit in about 3 weeks, then come back the following week for the results. Most of them were shocked. They'd tell me they called our competitor and were told the job could be done in 5 days. This conversation happened more and more often. Meanwhile, the folders on our desks kept piling up. We had properties measured and ready for the boundary presentation, but we couldn't get to them all because we were busy doing first visits on new jobs, which then needed second visits, while more new jobs kept coming in. After about 2 months of this disaster, the phone calls started getting really nasty. Clients would call asking when we were coming back for the second visit, and I'd have to apologize and explain we were behind schedule. When I'd try to schedule them for the following week, they'd explode. One client told me it had been 6 weeks since our first visit and he was supposed to close on his land sale a month ago. He called the whole situation ridiculous, and he was right. The boss finally noticed we were getting complaints and called us into his office. He wanted to know what was going on and why he was getting calls from angry clients saying we were taking forever. My colleague reminded him that we had warned him this would happen. We were doing twice as many site visits now, so everything took longer. But the boss just accused us of not managing our time efficiently and told us we needed to work smarter. When I pointed out we were working exactly the way he told us to, he just said to figure it out and that he didn't want to hear any more complaints. But the complaints kept pouring in. We were now running about 3 months behind on second visits. Clients who needed their surveys done for property sales were furious. Real estate deals were falling through because we couldn't get the paperwork done in time. Then last week the boss got a call that changed everything. It was from a notary who handles a lot of real estate transactions in town. The boss's office door was open and we could hear him getting absolutely destroyed over the phone. The notary was screaming that our company had cost his client $50,000 because a sale fell through due to our delays. When the boss tried to say we were doing the best we could with our resources, the notary shot back that he had called us 4 months ago for a simple property line survey. 4 months for what should have been a one-day job. He told the boss that he'd been working with surveyors for 20 years and knew this was garbage. The notary finished by saying he'd never use our company again and would tell every other notary in town to avoid us. After he hung up, the boss came walking out to our desks and demanded we talk right away. He called us into his office and closed the door. The boss was panicking, saying the notary was threatening to destroy our reputation over one delayed survey. My colleague pointed out it wasn't just one survey. We were months behind on dozens of jobs. When the boss asked how this happened, I reminded him that we had told him exactly how this would happen when he made us switch to 2 visits for every job, even the simple ones. Now we were drowning in appointments. The boss wanted to know if we could go back to the old way of doing things. My colleague asked if he meant the way that was working perfectly fine before he decided to mess with it. The boss got defensive and asked if we could fix the situation or not. I explained that we could try, but we had months of backlog to work through and some of our best clients would probably take their business elsewhere after this mess. That's when my colleague dropped the bomb. He'd been looking for another job since this whole disaster started. He'd gotten an offer the day before and was putting in his 2 weeks' notice. The boss went completely white. He begged my colleague not to quit, saying we were swamped and needed him. But my colleague had had enough. He told the boss that we were swamped because he ignored our advice and created this mess, and he wasn't sticking around to clean it up. So now we're even more behind than before, and we're losing experienced staff because the boss thought he knew better than the people actually doing the work. He's been calling around trying to hire temporary surveyors to help with the backlog, but he's having to pay premium rates because it's short notice work. Yesterday, I calculated how much extra money his brilliant plan actually made. The increased billing from double visits was completely wiped out by the overtime pay, the temp worker costs, and the clients we've lost to competitors. We're actually making less money than before, and our reputation in town is completely shot. The boss hasn't said a word about his master plan since my colleague quit. He just quietly told us to go back to single visits for jobs that don't need 2 trips. About 6 months ago, I finally decided to do something I've been putting off for years. Legally change my name. My parents thought they were being creative when they gave me this unique spelling of what's normally a common name, but it caused me nothing but headaches my entire life. People constantly mispronounced it, misspelled it on important documents, and I was tired of having to spell it out every single time I introduced myself. Plus, I wanted to ditch my father's surname for personal reasons I won't get into. The legal process took a few months, but eventually I had my court order in hand and was ready to update everything. I figured it would be a pain, but honestly, most places made it pretty straightforward. Social Security took about 20 minutes in one form. The Department of Motor Vehicles, which everyone always complains about, had me in and out with my new license in under an hour. My insurance company updated everything over the phone. My bank needed me to come in person, but the whole thing took maybe 15 minutes. Everything was going smoothly until I got to the very last item on my list, my travel credit card. This wasn't just any credit card. This was my business lifeline. I put everything on this card to rack up travel points for flights, hotels, and rental cars. The points had saved me thousands of dollars over the years. But here's the thing about travel. When you check into a hotel or pick up a rental car, the name on your credit card has to match exactly with the name on your ID. No exceptions. With a big client trip coming up in 6 weeks, I needed this sorted out fast. I called the credit card company on a Tuesday morning, expecting the same smooth process I'd had everywhere else. The customer service rep told me I'd need to fill out some form and mail it to them, along with a certified copy of my court order. When I asked if they could email me the form, they said they could only mail it to my address on file, and it would take 7 to 10 business days to arrive. 2 weeks later, I finally got the form, filled it out, made a copy of my court order, and mailed everything in. I waited another 2 weeks and heard nothing, so I called back. A different rep told me they had no record of receiving any documentation for a name change request. When I explained I'd mailed it 2 weeks ago, they suggested I could fax everything to a number they provided instead. I downloaded a fax app on my phone and sent everything through. 2 more weeks passed with nothing, so I called again. A third rep looked at my account and said they weren't showing any name change request in my file. They told me I'd need to mail or fax the required documentation. I explained that I'd already faxed it twice, and this was getting ridiculous. They apologized for the inconvenience and said they'd transfer me to a supervisor. 20 minutes of hold music later, I got transferred back to the general line. When I asked for a supervisor again, they told me none were available and I'd need to call back later. At this point, I was getting pretty frustrated. My trip was 3 weeks away, and I was running out of time. I decided to fax the documents one more time, but this time, I had a different strategy. After I sent the fax and got the delivery confirmation, I thought to myself, maybe I should send it a few more times, just to make sure it doesn't get lost again. So I hit send again, and again. By the end of the day, I'd sent the same fax 25 times. Still no response the next day. The following day was Sunday, and I was sitting on my couch watching football. During commercial breaks, I kept thinking about that stupid credit card company and how they kept losing my paperwork. So I pulled out my phone and started sending the fax again. And again. I wasn't really paying attention to how many times I was hitting send. I was more focused on the game. Every time there was a commercial break or a timeout, I'd grab my phone and send another fax. By the time I realized what I was doing, I'd sent that same 2-page document over 130 times in one day. I have to admit, at that point, I was doing it partly out of spite. Monday afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. A woman who introduced herself as Karen from the credit card company asked if I was the person who'd been flooding their fax machine. I told her that they had instructed me to fax my name change documents, so that's exactly what I've been doing. She told me that I'd sent the same fax over 150 times in the past 3 days. She said their machine had been jammed constantly and they'd had to refill the paper multiple times. She told me this was completely unacceptable behavior and that I couldn't just spam their fax machine because I was impatient. I explained that I wasn't trying to spam anyone. I told her that for over 2 months, every time I called, someone told me they never received my paperwork. I said I figured maybe their fax machine wasn't working properly, so I wanted to make sure at least one copy made it through. She said they had definitely received it now and that I'd have my updated card within 3 business days. I thanked her for finally processing it and said I really appreciated her help. 3 days later, my new credit card arrived in the mail with my correct name on it. Just in time for my business trip, the Social Security Administration and the Department of Motor Vehicles, places famous for bureaucratic nightmares, handled my name change faster and more efficiently than a credit card company. All they had to do was look at my updated driver's license, social security card, and court order. But somehow that wasn't enough proof for them. I ended up keeping that credit card for another year, but eventually switched to a different company that actually answers their phone when you need help. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.